Hi, this is Julie Lubinsky. I'm a manager for ChristopherReeve.org for the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you all here. We are going to be hosting a webinar on how to apply for a Quality of Life grant, and we are so fortunate to have with us Donna Valente, who's the Director of Quality of Life Grants, and also Shannon O'Connor, who's our Outreach Program Coordinator. Donna will be doing most of the presentation, and Shannon is definitely there to answer a lot of questions. So if you have any questions, you may type them in the chat box, or we will allow time at the end of the presentation for question and answers. So feel free, we'll definitely open up the lines then so you can get all your questions out there, and hopefully we can have time to answer them all. So I am going to now hand the presentation over to Donna and Shannon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Julie, and welcome everyone to our first webinar for Quality of Life grants. We're very happy to be able to offer this technical assistance and hope that it's helpful. And please remember that if you have other questions that we don't address here, we can follow up with you personally and also tailor other subsequent webinars to make sure we get your questions answered. Joining us today are over 250 people around the country, and actually in 7 countries outside of the United States. 42 states are represented, and we're happy that you're all here joining us. So we're going to start with the basics. Who can apply for a Quality of Life grant? Well, first of all, we can't award grants to individuals. So if you are an individual with paralysis that has needs, please call our information specialist. We have a lot of information that is specially made for you and for your families on living well and living a great quality of life in your community. So the Reeve Foundation funds nonprofit organizations, tribal entities, municipalities, and non-government organizations outside of the United States. Some examples of applicants that we've gotten in the past are traditionally from nonprofit organizations such as Disabled Sports USA, National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and some of the less common applicants that we receive are from organizations that don't actually have a 501c3 designation, which I'll talk about a little bit more in future slides. But it could be a public golf course, a playground at a municipal park, or another nonprofit that is not necessarily a 501c3 organization. We also have some groups that have been together for a while but don't quite have the official status to be eligible for a 501c for a Quality of Life grant. In that case, I would recommend that you look around and try to find out what services are being offered in your area. So we're going to take a little poll here and ask you to tell us what kind of applicant your organization is. The one thing that all of our organizations have in common is that they want to provide services for individuals with paralysis and their families. So a big question that we get is, what is paralysis? A lot of people think that spinal cord injury is what we're talking about with paralysis, but it's actually much broader than that. We use a functional definition of paralysis, and that's inability or difficulty in moving your arms and legs due to such conditions as spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, stroke, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, Lou Gehrig's disease, traumatic brain injury, and others. So it's very broad, much broader than just spinal cord injury. Some things that you'll want to make sure that you know before you go into actually applying. The biggest thing is that your organization plans to provide some service for people with disabilities. It doesn't need to specialize only in serving people with disabilities. For example, you could be a theater and you want to offer a program of inclusive theater arts, and that would be something where we would be able to certainly consider the request. Now we're going to talk about the nonprofit status. The IRS 501c3 is a special designation that's awarded by the IRS so that organizations who are built and created for the common good can receive donations and that the donors can get tax relief from those donations. It's a complicated process. It takes time. It takes money. So for an organization that's just started or a group that doesn't quite have that status yet and is thinking about applying, I would first suggest that you see if there's anyone in your area that's doing something similar. Perhaps you can partner with them to have them accept a donation as a fiscal sponsor. So you don't have to have it yourself, but the applying organization needs to have that 501c3 designation. Or the organization needs to be a government agency or a municipality or a department, such as a Parks and Recs department, or a tribal entity, or a nonprofit organization outside of the United States. So if you have received the Quality of Life grant already, you do need to skip 3 grant cycles before reapplying. If you applied to the Reeve Foundation and you did not receive the grant, you don't need to skip. You can come right back in and apply again. And we will provide feedback to you whenever possible to make your application stronger the next time. Shannon's going to do a little recap here.
All right, everybody. I'm so happy to see that we have so many questions coming in. Don't worry, we're going to talk more about what project type to choose and what types of projects fit into those categories in a little bit. I'm just going to recap what we talked about for eligibility. The most important things are that even if you're listening as an individual, we can't give the grants out to individuals, but we do have lots of other resources. So please call our information specialists, and they can provide you with fact sheets and resources for grants for individuals as well as financial assistance databases. The other important thing we just talked about is that if your organization supports many people or even some people with paralysis, you can still apply for a Reeve Quality of Life grant. We've had some organizations that applied for a grant that only supported 20 people, but it made such an impact in a community where there were limited resources that we were happy to award that. And also, make sure to keep trying. If you don't get the grant the first time, you can still apply during each cycle, summer and winter. And we're going to have more technical assistance webinars over the course of the next few years. So every cycle, there should be an opportunity to learn more about how to write a great application. Donna's going to talk more about the application process now, and this is where you're going to find out more about the categories and about how to use our online application tool.
Okay, so back to the online application process. We have the online application living on our website at christopherreeve.org on the Quality of Life Grants page. So once you get onto christopherreeve.org, you'll see several places where you can find the Quality of Life grants. When you're on that page, you'll want to look for the big red Apply Here button. And you can also find the page in other spots, but that's the most direct and clear way to go. So you want to click on that Apply Here button. I recommend strongly that you read everything that's available. And for those who have never applied for a grant before, we hope that you'll find this educational. And certainly any organization that you're going to be going to request funding, you should read everything you could possibly find on their website. Read the guidelines. If they have tips, read the tips. Those will many times answer your questions. We also have some information that has been developed throughout the years in response to things that our reviewers have seen. So the People First Language Guide is something you'll really want to look at and pay attention to. A lot of our reviewers live with paralysis themselves, and after reading a number of applications where there's language that can really be offensive to someone living with paralysis, you'll want to make sure that you listen to that and keep that in mind. So using people first language instead of and not talking about a poor, pitiful situation. You want to be empowering. You want to talk about the person first rather than paralysis or disabled person. You also want to make sure you read a quick guide to establishing evaluation indicators. This is very helpful when you're talking about goals and outcomes and impact. So we'll want to make sure that you read that too. There's a list of all the application questions available. You can print that out. Another thing that you will find helpful, you may find helpful, is to create a Word draft of your application. I don't have one on the website now, as we used to have a Word version of the application. We're not requiring that anymore, and I didn't want to confuse things by leaving something up there. But if you find that helpful, it's certainly worth your time to create a Word document, and then you can look at it and do word counts and refine it there and then cut and paste into the actual application. So the application has an attachment. Right now we have one attachment that's required, and that's the project budget. So you're looking at that now. It's an Excel template, and we'll need to see if you have any other sources of funding. This is where you can indicate that. The cells will expand as you add text. If there are any items in the budget that don't apply, you just leave them blank. And at the end, there's a summary of each of the categories in the budget. You don't need to fill that out. That's an autofill section. But you are going to want to make sure that the numbers that you have in your budget are the same that you talk about within your application. Some other budget information, you want to keep any indirect costs to a maximum of 10%. We usually don't see indirect costs except when we get applications from universities. We'd rather not fund it, but do understand that some organizations require that. We cannot fund food, so even if you have a food component to your project, like a nutrition program, just make sure you're not asking us to pay for the food. We can't do that. And make sure that the activities that you plan for in your proposal actually suit the people that you're serving. So, for example, if you are putting a pathway through a garden and want to make sure that individuals that use wheelchairs and walkers and canes can move over it with ease, you don't want to put in a product that is liable to cause more problems than a flat surface. For example, paving stones, I think we saw on a request for a path, and there were a lot of questions on if that was a safe option. So you really want to make sure that what you're proposing will be the most beneficial and safe for the people that you're going to serve. We do accept optional documents that will help support your budget. You can upload vendor quotes. If you'd like, you can upload photos and letters of support. And we have 2 vendor quote upload buttons available. You can use them. The other attachment that is required is for prior grantees, you will need to upload a copy of your most recent final report. Even if you've applied before and you've sent us that final report before, we do need you to upload it again at this point. In the future, we're hoping that everything will be integrated seamlessly and you won't have to repeat that, but at this time, we do ask that you upload a copy of your final report. And that helps us to make sure that that the project was successful and any roadblocks were taken care of. It gives us better confidence. Okay, so once you're in the online application, you'll need to create.
Before we go forward, we just had a few questions about indirect costs, 501(c)(3) status, and the fiscal sponsors. So Donna, first, would you mind telling us a little bit more about indirect costs and what those could mean?
Sure. Indirect costs are usually indicating the cost to run the organization, the basic operating costs. So for example, rent, telephone, electricity, the executive director salary, administrative support staff salary, those kinds of things that are more general operating rather than direct program costs. So that's for indirect costs.
Could you also tell us a little bit more about what would happen if there's an organization that doesn't have a 503(c) status, or if it's not confirmed yet, how they could use a fiscal sponsor?
Sure. If you've already applied for your 501(c)(3) status and you're waiting on that, you can apply. We tend not to want to fund brand new organizations, but if you've been doing your work for years and you have a strong history and you're just waiting for that paperwork to come through, you can apply. If you're recommended for a grant, hopefully by that point, if you have that 501(c)(3), we can go ahead and make the grant. If not, we'll need to ask you to come back in the next cycle. If you have not applied for a 501(c)(3) status yet, I would suggest that you look in your area to see any kinds of like organizations, or perhaps a rehab hospital or an independent living center, a sports organization. I had a question from a group that has a adapted tennis group, and they're registered with the United States Tennis Association, but they don't have their own 501(c)(3) status, and they're paying a lot of out-of-pocket costs. So what I suggested with them is go to the rehab hospital that's right in the area and has many sports programs, and see if they already have tennis. If they don't, then this could be the perfect opportunity for them to partner with you and begin to offer tennis to the people that are in their community. And other suggestions are independent living centers. You can contact them. A lot of independent living centers have adaptive sports programs, and you can see if you could either join that or add a program to something that they might not have yet. Another example of a fiscal sponsor is for a documentary film. There was a group that it called Women Make Movies, and they acted as a fiscal sponsor for, I believe, two projects that came through that group as a fiscal sponsor. So in that case, you would work with the organization. You would need to have an agreement with them that they would be able to accept the donation on the project's behalf, and we would be able to keep the accounting clear and so that everybody knows what's going on. But that's a way that you can work with an existing organization to do your work without having to go through all of that paperwork first. To get a 501(c)(3), it's a great thing if you can do it. It does take time. It takes money. You need a mission statement. You need a board of directors. It's complicated for a reason, because it's a special status. So that's why it's helpful to work with a fiscal sponsor if you can do that.
Okay, and if you do have further questions about that, we'll definitely address it in the live Q&A. The last thing that we're going to address before we move on is that the sources of funding for your entire program might be other sources that you would have as part of the budget, but you just want to address the program and project budget. So your organization might have other projects going on, but we just need to know the amount for the specific project that the grant would apply to. And again,
I think Dorothy asked that question. You're welcome to clarify more during the live Q&A. We'll also talk about final reports a little bit later on, and if your questions weren't answered about that, you can bring that in at the end as well.
Okay, so if you applied before and you had an account, you will need to create a new account for this cycle. We have a brand new vendor, and for those that applied last year or last cycle, hoping that you'll really find the process without all the technical difficulties we had in the last cycle. And you'll need to create a password. Once you do that, once you set up your account, you won't ever have to worry about remembering your password, because once you're in our system, if you forget, you just click on forgot your password, and we'll have your email information, and we can email you the information to either reset or get that password back. So the most important thing in your application is talking about the background and need of your application. So you'll want to let us know how you discovered this need in your community, and what steps has your organization taken to address this need. Are you talking to the people that you hope to serve to make sure their needs are addressed and their voices are heard? And this goes back to the paving stones for the path. You want to make sure that there are people that you hope to serve that are taking a look at what you're planning to do to make sure that it really is suiting their needs. And are you talking to other organizations in your area with whom you'll work? Do you have an established base already? Where are your people that you hope to serve coming from? This is where it's helpful to have relationships with other organizations in your area. Are there existing relationships with organizations already in place? And do you know of any other organizations in your area that are addressing this need? You'll want to pay special attention to the budget amount. We get a lot of questions about that. You want to make sure that the amount that you request from the Reeve Foundation, that it makes sense in what you're asking, what the total amount of your project is, and what other support that you have. So you want to make sure that the amount of the total budget, if your total project is $100,000 and you're requesting $25,000 from the Reeve Foundation, it's really important to demonstrate that you have some other funding at least planned. We get nervous when we see a request for $25,000 and there's no other support listed. And another thing to keep in mind too is that $25,000 is the maximum of our grant for this program, but we don't give a lot at that level. It has to be something that really stands out, and we'll talk a little bit about that more. And as far as the organizational history in your application, we'll want to know if your organization has served people with paralysis in the past, and the place that your organization holds in the community. We'd like to know a little bit of that history. And then if you have anything in your geographic area that makes a need particularly challenging to meet, we'll want to know that too. For example, if you have a transportation program and you live in a rural area with roads that are very difficult, that's really impactful to help us understand what that need is. Okay, now we're going to talk about project types. A lot of people worry about picking the correct project type, but that's something that we really use in the review process to help us compare projects that are alike. And if there's something where we feel it might fit better in a different category, we can always make that determination and change that. You don't have to stress over picking the right category. And there are 22 different options that you can click from. So one of those should hopefully be close to what you're trying to do. Just going to read through them quickly. Adapted sports, accessible playgrounds and ball fields, accessible treehouse, advocacy, arts, camp, caregiving, consumer education, durable medical equipment, education, employment, facility accessibility modifications, fitness and wellness, healthcare, home accessibility modifications, media development, medical professional education, PT and OT, peer mentoring and support, service animal program, therapeutic riding, transportation, and transition from institution from home. From institution to home. So there's a lot of categories there. Hopefully one of them will be close to what you're doing. But again, you don't have to worry about choosing the correct category. It's what you feel best matches. So in the application, you'll want to make sure that the timeline for the program is reasonable, that it makes sense, that it's doable. Is the project ongoing, or is it something that will take a few months to get up and running? You're going to want to provide at least one major goal, what it is that you wish to accomplish with this project. And you want to describe how you'll know if your program was successful. And this is where you're going to want to make sure that you read that quick guide to establishing evaluation indicators. We want you to elaborate on the impact of your project. Is it something that supports independent living in the community? And that can be related to many of our projects, so it doesn't have to be specifically independent living. Promote inclusion in communities. Does it make information about resources more available? Promoting inclusion in communities, that's something that's really important to us and hits a lot of the programs that I know are out there. Sports and arts and support groups and just social activities are all wonderful vehicles to get people out in the community with their families. About the review and selection process, we have a three-stage process. We have an initial eligibility review where I'll look at all the applications and make sure that all of those points we talked about before, as far as the nonprofit, the 501c3, or the other organizations that are eligible, that if it's a prior grantee, that you've waited the appropriate 3 cycles, and that it's something that will benefit people with paralysis and their families. Once that happens, we have a merit external review. We have 22 people around the country that are considered experts in the field. We have 8 of these people each cycle that serve on the external review panel. Each application is assigned to 2 of the reviewers. And we have a scorecard. We have an 8-point question that they use to score the applications. And those results are used to guide the internal review process. So about the scorecard, we have a 0 to 3 scale. For both of the reviewers, their answers will be averaged for the external reviewer score. Once those are all in and I have all of the information from all of the reviewers on all of the applications, all of that information is compiled here. We capture the comments, we capture recommended amounts, and any recommendations to fund or not fund. And all of that is taken in and recorded. And then we rank the applications by score, and that information is used to guide our internal process. So the questions are very simple on the scorecard. We want to know, is it Is the application well-defined and explained? The target audience specified? Is the need adequately justified? Timeline feasible? Goals clearly stated? Budget justifiable? Budget narrative clear? And goals feasible?
All right, is everybody prepared to process all of that information? I know that that was a lot, and that's really the nitty-gritty of the application process. So we will go back in depth to make sure that everybody feels comfortable applying this cycle, or even next cycle if you need more time. So just to hit on a couple of the points, I'm going to diverge from my slides if you're following along. I want to address some of the questions that came up and make sure that everybody's comfortable with the biggest and most important parts of the application process. Final reports. You only have to provide a final report if you've been awarded a quality of life grant in the past. The final report is what you write at the end of the grant year after you've spent all your money, and you tell us what you did, if you accomplished everything on time, what the impact was. You don't have to worry about that if you haven't gotten a grant yet. Donna, some people were wondering how far back do they have to go for final reports. So if somebody was awarded one grant in 2003, would they still include it when they're applying in 2015?
Yes. If you have it, then send it to us. If it's really impossible for you to find that final report if you were awarded in 2000 or 2004, I mean, that's already 11 years ago. So, and a lot of times computer crashes happen, staff changes, so we will help you. Let us know, and we'll help you find it. But if you cannot find it, we will work with you.
Yep. And I just moved back. If we can move back to the three-stage process, we had a request for that. So we're back to that slide so you can look at it while I go over one or two more questions. Hopefully that'll give you time to write it. But I just do want to remind everybody, we will have this webinar recorded. You'll receive an email soon with a link so that you can watch it anytime you want. And we can also provide the slides for you as well. So you'll have a chance to write down all of this information and look at it at a later time. It's the reason why there's a lot of text in the slides. We wanted you to have it all at the ready, and that way it'll be right there in front of you when you need it. So look for an email from Julie Levinsky. She'll be sending that out shortly after the presentation sometime this week. Another big question went back to the indirect costs. And on the budget template, there is a section for personnel costs that are related to the project. However, what type of personnel would be considered an indirect cost, Donna?
Okay, for personnel and indirect costs, I would think of that as an executive director. At a university, it would be the top dean or chairman or president. It's the backbones of the organization. Sometimes if there's one person, that could be, I wouldn't put, if it's a one-person show and they don't have any staff, I would not include that. Actually, I wouldn't even consider indirect costs in that situation. Indirect costs are really something that large organizations like universities and large hospitals deal with sometimes and are required to have a line for in every grant. So it would be the president of the university, all of the background people that run it, really the operational kinds of costs. In personnel, in the personnel area of the budget, that's where you can put the information as far as project-related personnel. And I think if an executive director is going to be requesting salary in the personnel line, it would be because of a specific relationship to that project.
Mm-hmm. So if you're hiring instructors to teach wheelchair basketball, their salaries could be requested under the personnel line. But if the executive director of the organization is also receiving a stipend for that program, but he's not directly involved with the program, that would be something that would go in indirect costs. And to address the question of if we do fund salaries, we do, but we're more likely to fund salaries if they're directly going to somebody who's living with paralysis or if they're directly related to making the grant application successful. we also had some questions about if we provide partial funding, and this does come up a lot. Donna, could you tell us a little bit about what happens if we decide that we can only give $5,000 for a grant application that requested $10,000?
Sure, and this actually happens a lot where we're able to give partial funding. That's where it's really important to have some other sources of funding demonstrated, so we can have confidence that if we can only do 5,000 of the 10,000, we'll still be able to do the project. So let's see.
So we're going to go ahead, and again, there's a lot of questions coming in. If we didn't get to it just yet, we'll make sure that you have a chance to answer during the live Q&A.
Okay, and then going back to the partial funding, that's why you'll see, if you look at lists of past grants, you might see some amounts that are just odd, like $4,811, and wonder, where did you come up with that? And that's why we want you to put as much detail in the budget as possible, because if we decide we really want to fund your project but can't do the whole request, our reviewers will often pick select items out of the budget and say they'll fund those. So for example, they might fund 2 wheelchair basketballs and transportation costs. So out of a budget that might contain lots of other things. So yes, we do partial funding, and that's why it's important to have other sources of project funding demonstrated.
And so the most important things from this section is that, I'm sorry, I'm just reading some questions as they come in. Sorry, everybody. The most important things from the application process to take home is that when you're writing the application, we really want you to help us understand the unique strengths of your community and also the unique needs of your community. And we want to know how your organization is well positioned to meet those needs using the strengths. Just a reminder, don't request funding for food. Keep indirect costs to 10%. We'll clarify a lot of the other stuff as we continue to talk through it. And make sure to include any of those letters of support, vendor quotes, community feedback. You can submit your additional documents under the vendor quotes button in the application. All the additional documents can go in there, and all of that helps strengthen your application.
Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about Reeve funding priorities. And we're really looking at projects that help promote independent living, community integration, and inclusion for families where there are people with paralysis, and also for the whole families. Caregivers are a big topic for us, and underserved populations. We're trying to outreach and really hit as many communities that we can, and that's one of the reasons that we're doing this webinar today. As far as what weighs heavier, what is looked at more favorably, the reviewers would rather fund programmatic costs than operating costs, and that's where the indirect costs and funding salary-heavy applications really come into discussion. So we would much rather fund, for example, transportation costs to get wheelchair basketball athletes and their equipment to demonstrations and games and championship activities. Requests that will definitely serve people with paralysis, as we've talked about before, are a lot stronger than a request that will just serve general disabilities, people with disabilities on a broad spectrum. So if you can demonstrate that there are people with paralysis that will be served, so that the reviewers don't need to search to find, are there really people with paralysis being served, that's very helpful. All of the information that we have at the Paralysis Resource Center can be used by your organization to help support your work. So we really hope that you'll let the people that you serve know about our information and services, and also the information that we have at the Paralysis Resource Center also can be used to help strengthen your application. There's a lot of information there, so if you're looking for information on how do I determine the number of people that will be served, and how can I spread the word, and how can I let my voice be heard, you're going to want to make sure that you know about the Paralysis Resource Center and you can share that information. A very frequent question that we receive is, how do I determine how much money should I request? As we said before, $25,000 is the maximum grant award for this program. And that is really given rarely, and there are a number of points that need to happen for a grant to be awarded at that level. It needs to be a project that meets a high priority need, has substantial reach, has a high expectation of success, and is replicable. The average grant is about $7,000. You'll want to make sure that your request reflects the number of people that you hope to impact. So if you have a request where there will be one or a few families that will benefit, it's not really appropriate to ask for that full $25,000. Details are very important, especially in your budget, and you're going to want to make sure that the activities that you talk about are reflected in the budget. Sometimes we'll love the application, and when we get to the budget, it doesn't relate at all to the activities that are talked about in the narrative, and that really raises questions. And as we talked about before with the partial grants, exact amounts for project budget items that are directly focused on people with paralysis and their families make much stronger budgets. So don't pad the budget with things that aren't directly related to the project, because we can spot that in an instant, and we are not going to want to fund it anyway. You'll have a much stronger request if it's concise, if it's very directly related to people with paralysis and their families. For prior grantees, we do things a little bit differently at the Reeve Foundation, where our subsequent awards are generally smaller than the first grants. That's because we want to make sure that we're funding new organizations and new programs. We don't want organizations to become dependent on Reeve Foundation funding, so we'll generally go to smaller amounts. And don't forget, if you are a prior grantee, we will need to see a copy of the final report on your most recent grant. Even if you've already sent it to us, if you upload it with your application, it makes it much easier for us to look at. And we always recommend that you seek out other funders. Don't rely on Reeve Foundation support, continued support, but also if you're applying to us for the first time, I don't recommend coming in for a project for $25,000 for what you're requesting from Reeve, and then if we look and see that the total project amount is also $25,000 and to the penny, and there aren't any other foundations or sources of support that you're going to, that's not going to weigh as heavily as an organization that has a targeted amount that's more modest than the 25, that's very specific to what you're doing, and that also has other funding.
Okay. Again, so many great questions coming in. And as we talk about priorities, there were some questions about what we prefer to fund and what's the smarter thing to request strategically. So going back to that example of the wheelchair basketball team, basically, if you're thinking about how much the money is going to have a direct impact on the people you're serving, would it have more of an impact if a salary is going to a driver who's driving the basketball team, or would it have more of an impact if it's going to scholarships for kids to be part of the team, or hotel costs so the kids can go to the championship, or equipment, or transportation to get to those practices. You really want to think about using the money the best way you can so that it impacts people living with paralysis or their families or their caregivers. We also had lots of questions about scholarships, and we have funded scholarships in the past, right, Donna?
We have funded organizations that award scholarships. We can't fund scholarships directly to individuals. But we've funded camperships for people, kids and adults, to attend camp. We've funded riderships for therapeutic riding organizations. We've funded scholarships that can help people attend consumer conferences such as Abilities Expos. Well, I think they're free. For consumer conferences, and let's see.
And for farmers to attend conferences too, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. I mean, that's something that we definitely like to fund, especially in conferences, because in that situation, that the funding for scholarships is really critical to enable the individuals living with paralysis to attend with their caregivers.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of questions are coming through about indirect costs. We will put together a summary of that, so you'll be able to look for that in your email soon. We'll kind of list out what is an indirect cost and what's something that would be considered personnel or equipment. So you will get more information about that. But again, as you're writing your application, think about the funding priorities and tell us how it's going to impact independent living, caregivers, underserved populations. All those things that Donna explained are really important to the Reeve Foundation. Also, you can tell the people that you work with that we have these resources, but we also want you to know that our resources are available for you before, during, and after your application process. You can definitely call the IS team to ask about suggestions for the best types of equipment. You can write into your application about how you want your community to be linked up with peer mentors. You can request books from our lending library to do research to write the best application possible. We send those books out for free with free return shipping, and you can get them through your local library or have them sent right to your house. So the more you show us that you're using the Reeve resources, the stronger your application is going to be. Also, you decide how much you're going to request based on how much impact your project is going to have and how much need there is in your geographic area. If there's specific challenges because you're in a rural town or you're in a city where there's underfunded health services, then that helps us to know about it because it'll justify why a certain amount is being requested. We're going to do a few short polls, and they're basically going to help us understand where you would like more information. This has been a huge overview, and we want you to have more opportunities to listen in with smaller chunks of detailed information. So the first poll will be up for about 20 seconds, and it's just a yes or no if whether it would benefit for you to see a step-by-step webinar taking you through the whole online application. And the second one is a chance for you to really tell us what parts of this webinar you wanted to learn more about. Donna's going to go ahead and put the polls up now, and then we'll have time for Julie to guide us through the Q&A. This one is about whether you want to see a step-by-step webinar showing each step of the application process online.
Getting some great suggestions.
Well, the last of those responses are coming in. We did have a question about final reports. If an organization has received more than one grant from Reeve, should they include all their final reports?
No, they just need to include the most recent.
Okay. And this is a great question that a lot of organizations wonder about how to best answer. Jill asked, do you have any suggestions on how to represent the number of people or families that will be impacted if you're requesting funds for equipment that's going to stand for many years and you don't exactly know how many children with paralysis versus children with general disabilities will benefit?
That's a very good question. I think that you'll just need to make your best estimation based on the use that you've had before, the interest from your community in that piece of equipment, and estimate, and that's a great place to start.
You can also tell us about your outreach strategy. If you don't have exact numbers, we'd love to hear about how you're going to get the word out, and how many mailings you might do, or how many people are going to hear about it through word of mouth. Tell us what you're going to do to get the word out so we have a better understanding of if it's going to be a large number of people or a relatively focused small number of people. Another question came about organizations that serve across disabilities. Do we fund organizations that serve people who are benefiting that have conditions other than paralysis?
Yes, we do. What you'll need to demonstrate to us is that your project or your organization serves some people with paralysis based on that definition that we had before. So that it's really broad, but it doesn't mean only people with paralysis. It can be lots of other whatever conditions or whatever's going on, whatever people that you serve. As long as you include some people with paralysis, then you're eligible.
Okay. And Julie, if you could help us out, I've been looking through some of the questions, but are there any questions that are standing out before we open up the line?
I know that I see that Catherine has her hand raised. I don't know if she has any question, but there's still a lot more people typing in the chat. But what I will do is I will ask Brandy to come on and start the Q&A part of the presentation.
Great.
All the lines are now open. And please mute your phone by pressing *6 and *6 again to speak.
So the phone lines are open, so keep in mind of your background noise. If you do have a lot of background noise, please press *6. That will mute your phone. Just stay muted. But now everybody's lines are unmuted, so please feel free to hit *6 to mute, *6 to unmute again, and I will hand it back to Donna and Shannon to see if there are any audio questions.
Catherine, I know your hand has been raised. Would you like to tell us what your question is? We can come back to Catherine. Jennifer? All right, we have some people losing audio. Jennifer says, if I'm using a fiscal sponsor, do we fill in their information in the first few pages of the application?
Yes. For a fiscal sponsor, you would use that organization's information, organizational information, and then you can talk about that relationship in the background part of the narrative.
Okay, and some people are asking about whether the reviewer comments are available and how to follow up if they're not awarded. Could you tell us a few things about that, Donna?
Sure. I record as much of the internal meeting discussions that I can, and I have the external reviewer comments are all saved. So if you contact me after the cycle's over, if you if you don't get a grant, I'd be happy to get that information to you. The easiest way is by email. Then I can go back. In the past cycles, I've had a large Excel spreadsheet that everything's captured in, and I just find your application and copy and paste the reviewer comments right into the email for you.
Annette, did you want to ask your question? About Mark Beckinger.
Sorry, I'm listening to a webinar that I have to do for my job, and
I think we might be having some trouble with the audio, so for the last few minutes, we'll try to answer as many questions as we can that are coming in through the chat box. Thank you all for being patient with us through this. There's so many questions that we're going to definitely write up some summaries with these frequently asked things so that you can see them after the webinar too.
I'm going to answer one on when is the grant due. August 18th is the deadline. We're not planning on extending that so I would try to make that deadline. If we do decide that we're going to extend it by a few days or a week, then we'll let you know on the website, but the 18th is the deadline. And as far as the timeline for the grant program, the application deadline is the 18th, and then I'll be doing the eligibility review part during the latter part of August and in September. In October, we'll be having the external review panel will be reviewing the grants, and then in November, the internal committee will meet to review, and then by the end of November, we hope to have the recommendations in place so that in December, we will make all of the notifications and send out the grant award. And then the next cycle will open beginning of January, and we'll do this again.
Okay. We have a couple of questions about organizations that have more than one project serving people with paralysis. Would that be something that they should submit 2 separate applications for?
Actually, that's a very good question, and here's how I've decided to handle this kind of question because it happens a lot. I would try, if you can, to choose one. If you have 2 or 3 programs or projects that you have that are just fantastic and you love them, if it's possible, pick the one that has the highest priority for you that you feel is best suited to the Reeve Foundation. If you can't make that determination, or for example, someone just emailed me the other day and they had 3 great initiatives that were just super, and each one was something that definitely tied into Reeve funding priorities. In that situation, I suggested that she group them and title the application Expanding Opportunities for Independent Living in Your Community, and then include each of those 3 separate things in the one application. And then it will be up to the reviewers, the external and internal, to decide whether to fund all of it or a part of each one or perhaps one. But sometimes, you know, you guys are your best advocates and you know best what you need. So I would prefer that either you do it where you give us a little menu or pick one, but definitely don't submit 2 applications.
Great. And since we're right about at 4 o'clock, there's tons of other questions that we haven't had a chance to answer directly. Wait a couple of days because we're going to put together an FAQ document with all of the great things that everybody's been bringing up. But definitely contact Donna and I at dvalente@christopherreeve.org or sob'connor@christopherreeve.org. Both of those names are up on our staff webpage if you can't see the slide. And let us know what burning questions you have that you really need help with so that you can submit the best application possible. Donna, if you just don't mind wrapping up, we've had a lot of questions about other types of grants and things like research. If you could just tell a little bit about some of the other funding opportunities through Reeve that are coming up in this year.
Okay. Well, research is something that we don't really fund in the Quality of Life Grants program. If you're looking for a support for a medical research program related to paralysis, I have some other suggestions for you. The Craig Nielsen Foundation is supporting spinal cord injury research. That their information is on our website, and I would investigate that one first of all. And then as far as other funders, we do have some listed on our website.
And then what the other grants that are not quality of life grants,
okay.
but
Okay, well, we're going to be offering something brand new this year in September, specifically for assistive technology programs at the state level. This is something that only organizations that are funded through the state centers on assistive technology. We have some more information specifically tailored to that. They're called a High Impact Grant Award. That's going to be for $75,000 each, and we're going to award 5 of those. So if for the designated assistive technology center in your state, that would be of great interest to you. And also it's something, if you're offering assistive technology, you're going to want to pay attention to, even if you're not one of those designated centers that are eligible. It's a very good idea for you to find out what's going on with assistive technology in your state. And then as far as quality of life, we have 2 cycles per year. We're currently in our 2nd cycle for 2015. So once this cycle concludes in December, we open another one up in January of 2016. And that deadline is in mid-February, and it concludes in May.
And we do prefer that your grant project be completed within 1 year. If you think that that might not be possible, make sure to contact us before you submit the grant so we can provide some advice on whether or not it's the right type of project to submit. Julie, do you have any other housekeeping?
Just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and also this webinar was recorded. It is recording now, and I will have it up on the website by the end of the week, and I will make sure all confirmed registrants get an email with that link that they can view it. Otherwise, you will find a link for it on the Quality of Life landing page, which is at christopherreeve.org/QOL, Quality of Life. So you will find, when it's ready, you'll find a link to view the webinar there. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and look forward to receiving your applications. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye.
Bye.